Alright, hey, hello. Welcome to part 1 of the CG Cookie Transformer training series. In part 1, I will take you through the process of creating the ground, creating first the big ground for reflections and shadows and such. I will also create ground layers for simulation, and then lastly we're gonna create some proxy meshes which we will attach to the robot, and we're gonna use those for the interaction of the robot with the ground. So this is what I have. Just a scene with a track camera and a pre-animated robot which transforms into a car. Right, let's look through the camera with numpad 0. There we go. And now we can see where we have to place the ground. So the track is set up like this grid is already the ground, so that's very nice. So I'm gonna just with the cursor in the center, I'm gonna just add a plane and move it around a little. Tab into edit mode. Oops. Let's select this edge and move it back so it covers the whole frame. Alright. Let's select this edge now. Move it all the way to the left. Select the right edge and move it further to the right. Okay. And then this edge, I want to move it so that it matches this corner. With Z you can tab between wireframe and solid mode. So I want to match this vertex with this corner roughly. Then press E to extrude, press X to snap along the X-axis, and move it up, all the way up to the back. We can take a closer look when we move to the end of the frame range. So it matches this little edge, and then select those two vertices, extrude along the Y-axis. And we can see this is a little slope, so move it down so it matches this line. Alright, this is the ground. Very simple. Now, obviously I don't want to use this ground for the simulation because that's, well, I'm going to use it as a static object. But for the shards, I want to use a separate layer which only lives around here, and I want to do that for the sake of efficiency, because I just want to make that part as big as needed for the robot to interact and not bigger. Let me just explain while I'm creating it. So I'm going to add a cube, no plane, because a cube has volume, a plane doesn't have any volume. That's fine for the casting shadows and reflections, but for actual simulation and shards I want to have some volume. So I'm going to start with a cube, and I'm going to scale it down in the Z direction, so it's a little bit flat. Okay, cool. Let's move it up here and go press 7 and 5 to go into orthographic top view. Press period, numpad period, to focus on the selection. Now we can take a look at where we need to have this layer. So I'm going to scale it up in the Y direction. Alright, so let's take a look. Okay, this hand has to interact with the ground, so I need to scale it up in the Y direction some more, as well as the X direction, obviously. Alright, so here it lands with the feet. So let's scale it up in the X direction some more. And maybe a little more. As you can see, I don't have the full mesh of the robot to speed up my 3D viewport. But now maybe it's a good idea to view it. It's on layer 6. There we have it. I think you can move it a little bit forward. Alright, cool. Let's move it to the left. And maybe scale it up a little bit in the Y direction. And move it to the right. Just so it has a little edge around all the spots where the robot hits the ground. Okay, cool. I'm gonna go to side view, orthographic, front orthographic, and I think I want to make it a little bit thinner. And once we did that, I'm gonna move it down so the top of this layer matches the original ground, like this. And maybe just a little thinner. Okay. So this is gonna be the top ground layer, the asphalt layer. So let's call it asphalt layer. Okay. And we could add a ground or a plane beneath this and simulate the impact of the robot on this thin layer. But I found it doesn't look too good if you do this. So what I did is add another sub layer, which is exactly the same size except for the height. So let's just duplicate this layer and move it down in the Z direction and call it sub layer. Alright, and go to side view and scale it up in the Z direction. Something like this. And then move it up so that it barely touches. I obviously don't want to intersect with this asphalt layer, but I do want to move it as close as possible so that it supports the asphalt. Alright, I think that's close enough. And if you zoom out, we have this sort of sandwich of two layers. Alright, next thing I want to do is apply the scale. If we look at the scale now, it looks like this. If you press Ctrl A, I can apply the scale, and then it resets the scale to 1 without changing the scale of the actual object. And do the same with this layer. This just prevents any problems down the road with simulating. So it's good practice to do this. Actually, I'm not sure what happens when I shatter these things. But yeah, I just like to make any object I use for simulation, I want to apply the scale. So also this one, it's still 1 because I scaled it in edit mode. So it doesn't change the scale of the object. Okay, so what I want to do next is fracture these layers. I'm going to use a particle system to define where the shards are going to be. So add a new particle system. 1,000 particles is just fine. I think I used even more particles with my final result, but for this tutorial I just keep it at 1,000 to prevent any clutter of the 3D viewport and any slowdowns. So I want to start emitting at the start frame of my scene. So just copy this with Ctrl C and paste it in here. I also want to end it at that frame. So I immediately have 1,000 particles. Then I want to emit from the volume instead of the faces. And I want to distribute them randomly. Okay. And if you now play, you can see they fall down because they have physics applied. So I don't need physics. Oops. So press no under physics. And now they stay at their original location. Alright, so this is fine. And then finally in the render, I don't want to render any of these particles. So set the render to none. And set the display to point so I can still see them. And alright, so let's call these particle settings static 1000. Alright, so I'm going to use these particles to shatter this layer. And for the sub layer, I'm going to use exactly the same particle settings. So when you add a new particle system, it adds new particle settings. But I can just under this menu, I can choose for the static 1000 I just made, and now we have 1000 static particles with exactly the same settings. Okay, yeah, let's go on with fracturing these layers. Oh wait, before I want to fracture, I obviously want to add materials to those layers. Especially with the asphalt layer, I want to add 2 materials. So this is going to be the regular asphalt. And then add another material slot with a new material called asphalt inside. Alright. And I want to make the asphalt viewport color a little bit darker. Okay, move on to the concrete layer, and this is going to be just a simple layer, simple material, only 1. Alright, so now we can see they have different colors. Okay, now select the asphalt layer and use the cell fracture add-on. Right now I don't have the cell fracture add-on enabled, but I'm using Blender 2.67, so it should be available in my default add-ons. So when you go into File, User Preferences, Add-ons, and search for Cell, and there we have it. Let's enable it, and that's fine. And now we have a cell fracture button. So let's press it and go into the settings. So by default, own particles is selected, which is this particle system, which is what I want. I want to set the source limit to 1000 since we have 1000 particles. Then I'm not going to worry about these settings. In the mesh data panel, I don't want to apply the split edge, and the margin is set to 0.001 which is cool for simulating. This creates a little gap between the shards, and the mass is calculated according to volume. I think this is only for game physics, so it's not very important. The recenter is very important to check, because it recenters the object origin, which also acts as the center of gravity when we are simulating. So this is very, very important. And I do want to move them to the next layer. That's cool. Oh, I forgot the material. Of course, when we do the material, I want to set this to 1, so the inside of the shards are gonna have the asphalt inside material. And then in the debug panel, I don't want to show the progress real time. This slows things down, so with these settings I can press OK and wait for the script to finish. Okay, the script is finished. I can see I made a little mistake. I put the asphalt and concrete layers on layer 9. I actually want to have them on layer 2, so I select them both and move them to layer 2 with M. And enable layer 2 with Shift 2. And then I moved the shards to the next layer. So when I look at layer 10, there we have all the shards. Let's select all of them. And as you can see, it's exactly 1000 objects. But let's move them to layer 3. Yeah, layer 3. Okay, there we go. And let's add them to a new group with Ctrl G. Then they become green, that's fine. Let's call it the asphalt shards. Alright. Okay, looking good. We have the asphalt shards, and with the different inside material, you can see we have the asphalt inside has this light gray, and the regular asphalt has the dark gray. So that's cool. Let's do the same thing with the concrete layer. Again, self-fracture own particles, set the limit to 1000. Don't apply the split edge. The material, I don't have an extra material slot, so that's fine. Recenter next layer and don't show real-time progress. Okay. And there we go. Let's take a look at layer 3. There we have all the concrete shards. So let's Ctrl G, add them to a new group. And add them to concrete shards. Okay. So now we have all the shards made, ready for simulation. I'm not gonna simulate in part 1, so we have to wait for that. Last thing I want to do in part 1 is add proxy objects for the robot. So let's take a look. This is the high density robot mesh. These are the panels, and these are the car panels. They will emerge when it transforms to a car. And this layer is also the ground. I want to move the ground to layer 1. But this final layer is the proxy robot mesh. Alright. And the layers down here are the armature layers. So let's take a look. I want to parent my proxy objects to this armature, so I also want to enable this layer. Okay. Let's make sure the 3D cursor is in the center and add a cube. This will be my right foot, my right proxy foot. So proxy foot.r. And the reason I want to add proxy objects for the robot is to do the simulation too, so that I don't have to use this complex mesh to simulate with the shards, and it's just for speed up the simulation process. So with this proxy foot cube added, I want to change the display settings to wireframe and X-ray. So whenever it's behind another object, you can still see it. And then I want to parent it to this foot control bone. So select the cube and shift select this foot control bone. And then press Ctrl P and set the parent to be bone. So now this cube is parented to the foot, and I want to move the cube to this foot, and there's a little trick which is very useful. So select only the cube and press Alt P and clear parent inverse. This will just copy the complete transformation of this foot to the cube. So if we look at this, it's exactly the same transformation as the foot. Okay, so now I want to just create a simple mesh out of this cube. So let's scale it down and move it around. I want to use my 3D manipulator in local orientation instead of global, because global is just the global scene, and local is really the rotation of this foot. So that's very useful. Press numpad period to focus on the selection, and then just roughly model this. As you can see, I'm not able to select this vertex because it's behind. So if I disable this button, now I can select it. Okay. So let's quickly try to match this. If I want to scale in the local X direction, I have to press SX twice. So I mean XX. So then it snaps to local X, the local X direction. Okay. I'm going to speed up this process and get back to you when I'm done, since this is not very sophisticated stuff. With Ctrl R I can add edge loops. Ctrl R and 2 adds 2 edge loops. Alright, I think this simple mesh will do for the simulation. If not, we can always make it more, add more detail. Okay, I don't like how this is displayed, so I want to draw all edges. It looks better. To me, it's just personal preference. Okay, so now we have the proxy foot R. For the proxy foot left, I just want to use this exact same mesh. Yeah, so let's duplicate it and Alt P, clear the parent, and it snaps back to the origin. And with this foot selected, first let's rename it to .L. And then with this proxy selected, I'm going to select the foot, the left foot, Control P and bone. and then only select the proxy object, press Alt P and clear parent inverse. Alright, this looks good, I think. Yeah, okay, cool. So now we have these two proxy feet. Let's do the same thing for the hands. My 3D cursor is not at the origin anymore, so to reset the location you can press Shift C. There we go. Let's add another cube and call it proxy hand.r, and make it a wire, X-ray, and draw all edges. Okay, and let's parent it to the hand control. So I think we use this bone. Control P, bone, and then Alt P, clear parent inverse. There we go. I have to scale it down in edit mode. I like to do it in edit mode so the transformation is still at the default. Alright, let's take a look what happens here. This is going to be a little bit more complicated because the hand is moving. First it's open, and then the robot makes a fist. But I think we can get away with a simple shape that works for both situations. So yeah, let's first do the fist. Let's rotate it in object mode, because what this does is it also rotates the local manipulator, so then it stays aligned with the mesh. Okay, and now I can press W and subdivide smooth, so that it creates a little rounded shape with more detail. It's exactly the same as applying a subdivision surface modifier. Okay, let's try to match this a little bit. Again, this is just the process of trying to get away with the most simple mesh possible. Okay, so we have a little fist here. Let's see what happens when it creates the open hand. Alright, so let's just animate the position and rotation of this this proxy object to match the two situations of the hand. So at first, well, it already matches for the fist situation, so let's add a keyframe for the rotation and location with pressing I and then lock rod. So now this position is set, and then for this situation I can just move it around a little bit. And just, yeah, well, we try to get away with this, and I think it will work. And if not, we can add more detail later. Okay, so press I, lock rod. Okay, let's take a look. I think this is enough to make those shards fly around. Alright, and later maybe we find some shards flying through the robot, so then we have to add more proxy objects for more body parts, but for now I'm gonna just leave it with the feet and the hands. So let's add the final object. It's again, add a cube and call this proxy hand .l. I created a new object because this is a different kind of hand because it's not moving, but let's just delete it. Let's just try to just duplicate the hand as we did with the foot. So Shift D, Alt P, clear parent, rename it, and go into animation, and right now it's in the fist position, I guess. So let's delete this animation with X, where we have here the animation curves. Let's just delete them. Okay, let's move back to the default view and select the hand. Shift select to select them both. Control P bone. Select the hand proxy. Shift Alt P clear parent inverse. There we go. And I think this pretty much matches the hand pretty well. Okay, cool. The final thing we can verify is into front orthographic view. We can see if those proxy meshes are penetrating the ground a lot. So I think this is a little bit too much for the left hand. So let's go into edit mode and move some of these vertices up so it doesn't penetrate the ground too much. And then we can always change this. The rule is that what I found is the more this mesh penetrates the ground, the more explosive the simulation is going to be. So we can use that to alter the simulation to our needs. This one is really deep. Let's move it up a little. It does match this hand, but still it's very deep, so I think it's a little too much. Okay, and since I moved it, I want to reset my location rotation keyframes. And in the fist position it's fine, I guess. Okay, let's check the feet. So there it comes down. And I think the feet are fine. You can still see this point is not really matching this one since it's moving, but I think we can get away with this. Okay, so all the proxy meshes are on this layer. I want to move them to a different layer. Let's see. Let's select them all in the outliner, and let's press M and move them to layer 5. Okay, there we go. There are the shards. And there we go. So today in part 1 we created this ground for overall interaction with in terms of lighting. So shadows and reflections are going to be casting onto this layer. Then we created 2 ground layers for simulation, and we added them to separate layers. We shattered them with the cell fracture add-on, and finally we created some proxy objects which are going to be interacting with those shards in the simulation part. This concludes part 1 of the Transformer tutorial series, and I will see you in part 2.